It's a real opportunity and privilege here to have a conversation with Ed Dittus. A lot of you may not even know his name, which is sad because one of the most important stories I ever covered in this business, albeit for the wonky part of planning and science and media, was the emergence of marketing mix models. And Ed Dittus basically founded it. I mean, I don't know if he literally invented the concept, but he's the guy who made it work. And it was in the early 90s that I first encountered him. And he had created a company, MMA, I think it's stood for Marketing Media Analytics or Associates
Mar marketing, media marketing assessment.
Assessment. And Ed built this fabulous platform, eventually got some of the world's biggest packaged goods marketers to use it, changed their entire media strategies, and more importantly, the way they measured the results. Eventually, it got acquired by the parent of Aegis then called I'm sorry, Cara, the Aegis Media Company, and used it as a point of differentiation for Cara, which was the only agency equipped with this methodology and could go to market and show their clients exactly what was generating sales off the shelf and things like that. And you fast forward over the next few decades, and there are a multitude of marketing mix models out there and their successors, attribution models of all kinds. I mean, it's so overwhelming, the cottage industry that Ed helped spark. Um, it's hard to even keep up. For a few years, uh, Jim Spaeth and Al Sylvester at uh, gosh, blanking on the name, Sequent Partners, created an annual tome, an annual assessment of the leading attribution and mix models, and there were hundreds. And these were just the ones like that really, made a dent in the business. So I think, we're at a time now where Google has Meridian offering it free to the long tail, to small, medium-sized businesses. And I'm sure all these things are great, but it's only as good as the science and the data you're putting into it. So I kind of wanted to have this conversation with Ed to reintroduce him to some of our readers and catch up with him. But before I get into it, I just want to say a personal anecdote was just a week or two before we reconnected, I did an interview with this young Turk, Henry Hen Innes, who's the CEO of Mutinex, which is a new mixed model. It's kind of interesting. I mean, his claim is that it's the first open source one. He publishes all of his code and everything on GitHub, so anybody can access it. And he's trying to set industry standards for this business. It's an interesting story. Actually, I haven't written about it yet, but I had this interview with him, and one of the things I thought was interesting was he was this young Turk toiling in Y&R VML, Y&R's media department in Australia when he came up with this idea. Ed Dittus was this young Turk, a group of smart, brilliant young minds working at Y&R in the late 70s and early 80s who came up with this model in the first place. And I was thinking about that when Ed reached out of the blue, and so I thought it'd be a good opportunity to do a little conversation with him. So, Ed, with that crazy introduction, I just like you to put in your own words, like why this idea of mixed modeling was so important at the time, and what you think it is today, and how it's changed the business.
Okay. So we have what, 10 minutes? I had been hired at Young Rubicam by a guy named George Williams, who was a very smart guy from the UK, who subsequently went to, at that time, General Foods. And he was doing an analytical thing that was Monte Carlo simulation. He took reach and frequency. He created N people, theoretical people in the computer. He exposed them to advertising, and then he stepped through in various ways the purchase probability. And it used to we had a Burroughs computer, and they used to regularly get horrible phone calls from the head of computing. Dave Guest, his name was, that you Williams, you stopped the computer again. Anyway, and I was sort of interested in that. My background was psychobiology, physiological psychology, and I think that's why George hired me. He collected people, and the approach interested me. When George left, I said, wait a minute, why are you doing it that way? I mean, it'll never be mainstream. It'll never be usable if it takes me 2 weeks to answer a question. So I said, well, reach frequency, reach times frequency, GRPs. What do they measure? GRPs. So that became a surrogate for the granular inputs that George used. And I left there. I went off to IRI for a while. I went off to Burke for a while. And Burke at the time was owned by Arbitron and was Sammy Burke. And they were having a hard time and they were letting people go. And I said, hey, I knew Rick Riccio quite well. I knew him from my Y&R days. And had lunch and I said, listen, Rick, I got an idea for something. I really think there's something here. It's bigger than a bread box. I don't want your job. I mean, not to be too confrontational. I don't enjoy this selling data by the pound. Let somebody who does enjoy that stay. I'll go off. So I went off, and the very, very, very first marketing mix analysis was
Just happen to have it there.
we moved, and I've got all the tons of paper. Maxwell House Coffee.
Wow.
And there we go. And it was back in 89. And that was the very first one that was done in the universe. And it's for sale, by the way, if you are interested.
On
The
eBay.
Yeah, but and we had gotten a we had been dis I had been discussing things with our friends at General Foods, and I had an agreement in the beverages division, Henry Rack, to do an analysis, and it was $60,000, and we were analyzing everything in creation, something like that, and it worked. I spent the first year of the creation of MMA. Um, in a bathrobe at home programming. That was my first year. And occasionally I'd go out and talk to a client. But it we addressed the core issue, you know, what should I spend when, and that was the thing that really, didn't set us apart. It was what we did, and it was unique, you know.
Well,
So,
the
but
important
that
part, the important part is it worked.
Well, yes, and we had validated. We used to hold out samples because I approached it more from a a theoretical, formal scientific standpoint. We did hold out samples, and we would project, and we would track, and so on and so forth. So, and it was all public. I mean, not public, but for our clients, and no one, I mean, everyone was quite happy, with the results. Um, and it was used, tactically as well as strategically. We had one case, I think it was Henry, who said, "There's something going on in Boston, and would you?" So we went off, we analyzed it, and at the end of it, they were up 10%. And I said, Henry, there is absolutely nothing we can identify that tells us why your sales went up 10%. And he chuckled and he said, well, the thing was they were incenting the sales staff to trim the shelves, make sure the product was there, make it look nice. And I said, really?
Right.
So there you go. I mean, that was one of the little tactical things.
So, I mean, when you built that, I would argue it was simpler times than what we're living through today. But, you
Mhm.
were able over time, the main input was, like you said, GRPs. That was the coin of the realm back then. You had the
Yeah.
outputs, you had the sales data, and you could adjust for things like the end aisle display guy or the weather pattern or the
Yep.
sales incentive to the stocking shelf people or whatever.
Sure.
Um, but it was a very, I don't mean this in a denigrating way, it was a very uh, simplistic world that you were managing that in relative to what's going on today, where it's an explosion of media options. How do you
Yeah.
think, and as a consultant, you've continued to be an advisor to big companies. How do you think marketing mix models have evolved over the next few decades, are they doing as good a job? We have new versions coming out that are AI powers. There's a conflation between mixed modeling, which is largely regression based, and um, attribution model, which is more, probabilistic.
Mhm.
I'm getting a little wonky here myself, but how do you think mixed modeling has kept up, and what would you do differently today?
Well, I just want to make one point. Back in the day when we were doing this, when you're in the belly of the beast, the world is horribly complex.
Hmm.
And complexity is sort of a self-induced perspective. We were dealing with, I'm going to bring up an old term, homes past. Remember that?
Right,
We didn't have cable, and I mean, we had to account for the fact that not every home had cable. And I remember I was at Young Rubicam when it went past 50%. So that was the environment, and it was always a question of, well, what about this new world? What about outdoor, and so on and so forth. And it was never, we never sat there and looked at each other and with a certain amount of smugness and said, "Thank God we live in a simple world." We never said that. Um, the other thing is that one of the neat things with the approach we had was you could account for things that had an impact through a careful analysis. I mean, it was much like the Boston thing where there were 10%, whatever it was, the sales that were missing, unaccounted for. If there were sales unaccounted for, I mean, up or down, you could go back to a client and say, "What the hell happened here?" And with some authority, you know. So the other question is, of course, it's a more complex universe today. I mean, it'd be a fool to say it isn't. But then the question is, from the standpoint of managing a business, does it matter? It because I mean, if I mean that's an open. In some cases, it would. Now, listen, I ran an internet business, and I was also the what do you call it, test marketing maven at Young and Rubicam, did seminars and all this. We had a business, multi-million dollar business. If I wanted to test something, say, is this a good thing to sell? I would put it on the Saturday morning, and by Monday afternoon, I would know.
right.
So you've got also a level of control today that you never had back in the day, and that gives you power, I think.
Absolutely.
Um,
But a lot of that
you
is
know,
manifested in the attribution modeling where they have it tied to real-time online sales data and
mhm.
um, where so are regression
Yeah.
models still the right way to go, I guess is what I'm asking.
I think, the answer to that is whatever works. I mean, if you're a product manager and I say, "Hey, look, I've been able to predict your sale. I've got stimulus control over the all the levers you can push. I can tell you, and I can do it reliably, and I can prove it." Then the methodology doesn't care. I mean, that's something you got to be really careful about, I think. Methodology is not really a rel anybody that walks into a room and says, "I've got a better methodology," you punch them in the nose and you say, "Show me the results," I think.
So another thing that's changed is when you started out, it was a handful of powerful players who were licensing this, companies like Kraft and General Foods and P&G. They had the resources, some big agencies.
Hmm.
Today, everybody has access to these tools. And I don't mean that
Yeah.
facetiously, but when Google made Meridian available as a mixed modeling thing, yeah, arguably it's weighted towards Google, but that allowed any small mom and pop shop that buys inventory on Google to have the same power, in theory, of mixed modeling that any big company would. And my question for you is, has it become a zero-sum gain? Are we reaching a point of regression to the mean where everybody will have that same superpower now.
Yeah, I think so. Now, how it's manifested is another issue. I mean, when I left MMA, I was working on what today you would call, or one would call an artificial intelligence approach. It seemed to me that you should be able to say, "Hey, MMA model, I need to optimize my profitability in the following markets. How do I do that?"
Hmm.
And it's an if then else. I mean, call it AI, but there are it's a programming problem primarily. And I had envisioned when I left that within a very short time, every product manager would have some version of this on their desk. They wouldn't need a research department. They would need people to, collect data using
Right.
Nielsen or IRI, and that a lot of the functionality
Yeah.
within an organization would be not automated is the wrong word, would be under the control of a unifying kind of set of processes. My model, my company's modeling, clearly in my mind that would be the way to do it. It could be any one of a variety of ways. Um, I don't see that happening. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I've been engaged in other pursuits, but
Sure.
it seems to me that the the modeling, the information gathering is still siloed and or more, it's siloed. That is,
Right.
there are specialists, there are people. Let's call up Ed and get the lowdown. That's wrong. If that occurs, it's not being implemented properly. It should be something that is the way I mean, I'm assuming I'm talking to Joe Mandisi now. Why? I mean, you could be an AI version of Joe Mandisi. I haven't seen you in 20 years.
Yeah, well, I will tell you the answer is the AI would be a lot smarter than me in the questions I'm asking you. Um,
Yeah.
AI
And
has
it
been,
might even, excuse me, I mean, the AI might be saying, "Okay, human, you allow the power to come to me, but I'm going to tell you the questions to ask."
that's right.
Right? I
I
mean,
mean,
and that,
yeah,
yeah.
look, we're all using AI tools more and more. Don't ever let AI write for me unless it's a part of a story where I'm explaining why I let the AI write for me. But I do ask it questions all the time. It's helpful in research, and it is helpful in me organizing questions sometimes for interviews like this. I will say I did not ask for a prompt to ask you these questions. This is all gut from Joe Mandisi.
Good.
But in the
Excellent.
past year or two, AI has transformed Madison Avenue, including your old shop and companies like that. I won't even go into what WPP is doing. But in the last quarterly announcement, Interpublic said so far this year, they built 10,000 purpose-built AI agents that have generated hundreds of thousands of media plans already. Look, I don't know if they're better or worse, but they're moving fast and it's having an effect.
Yeah.
And
But if
I,
I were a client of
yeah,
one of the Interpublic companies and the CEO of Interpublic said that to me really proudly, I
mhm.
would say, "Here's my volume. Am I meeting my goals? Am I more, is there shareholder value? If there isn't, I'm getting myself a new agency because you're focusing on the wrong damn thing."
No, absolutely. The proof is in the pudding, and that was an
Yes.
announcement to shareholders because they were trying to explain that they were moving fast and breaking things, but
Yeah.
moving fast
Yeah.
and getting efficiencies. I think a lot of people are betting that AI is going to be a more super-powered situation. And the way agencies are using this for the most part are still as co-pilots. They're not really turning it over to the AIs. The next
Mhm.
generation is going to be agentic, where that AI will be sitting with the team decisioning. The generation after that is super intelligence, and nobody knows what the hell's going to happen with
Yeah.
that.
But think of the evolution of calculators. My
Sure.
dad would come home with a comptometer and it had a handle. And the
Right.
thing, and the thing would make noise and clunker. It didn't even use power, right? I remember when they came out with digital, with a handheld calculator, and it was, oh my God. And then they came out with something that would do a square root. Oh my God. Little by little, and you take the technology for granted, and the nature of the questions change.
Hmm.
I mean, a kid
Oh,
sitting, you can do I mean, it's
it's
amazing. It's terrific. So I think the issue is I mean, that's a doctoral dissertation right there. What are the questions going to be 10 years from now?
Yeah, I think, well, you also touched on something I think is important, which is the old McLuhan concept of the medium is the message. Each media platform changes the way we use information and think about it.
Yes.
And this one is doing it on steroids. When you were back in Y&R in the mid 70s, did they actually have slide rules in the office?
I'm not going to answer that, Joe.
Okay. Um, so late last year, there was an industry conference. I won't bore you on the details, but this very smart person, Kelly Abakarian, who was a longtime Nielsen exec, who had been at NBC Universal and head of analytics and research, was speaking as a consultant and advisor now independently. But she made this very powerful speech that struck me. She said, every number we use today is modeled, every number. And whether you're using big data plus, calibration panels or whatever you want to call it. And, I had an opportunity to speak to her afterwards, and I said, wasn't it always modeled? I mean, whether you had a Nielsen sample household of 4,000 people representing millions of Americans, in some form, we've always been modeling. What's happening is we're becoming more modeled in some way. And I just wanted to get your thought on that, like that we're living in a modeled world.
I think I think you're right. I mean, I think the maybe the only thing that wasn't modeled back, in the Y&R days was the old Sammy warehouse withdrawals. They went in, they counted boxes, it was a count.
Right.
But it seems to me that they would put that there was some algorithm addressing much of the data. I think what's happened also is, I mean, management, it's become sexy to use the word modeling in AI. When management, when it enters their vocabulary, then it becomes a thing, right? I mean, that's the nature of it. And I think that it's a question of awareness more than anything else. Because you're right. I mean, there had always been some treatment of data, of information of various sorts. So I think it's, I mean, I think it's fairly healthy. I mean, but you made an interesting point, which I'd like to think about a little bit, and that is, you said, is it regression to the mean? If everyone has the exact same tools, and the data is of equal, you don't have the Nielsen date. Well, Charlie over here, he knows how to interpret those Nielsen numbers better than anybody. There won't be any more Charlies, right? The numbers will be the numbers. The results of the modeling will be the result. If you, as Kraft, and me as Procter and Gamble, both product managers, and we do this exact same, we're going to come up with the same numbers, right?
Well, yeah, just to follow up on that, the differentiator right now is what's called elite data sets. That my AI platform is being trained on data that you don't have access to. So the big play at Omnicom was acquiring all these commerce data platforms and rolling them up. Now they're merged with Interpublic, and they're going to have this supreme elite data sets of actual commerce, real-time commerce data, which is like the elite data set that the Sammy Burke data was from the warehouse withdrawal, but on steroids now. And WPP is doing their version of that. And, so it all comes down to that. But my view is in the future, the AIs are going to be good enough to fill in the blanks that if you have enough of the data, you can kind of model where it's netting out. So I think this elite data set play is good for now. I don't think it's going to hold up long term, but that's what they're banking on.
Well, but again, the direction this conversation is going in, I think is what the industry tends to do, and that is you get in the weeds and let's talk about the data. Now I'm going to put on my CEO hat and I'm going to say, are you meeting my needs? And I do elite, I don't care about that.
Sure.
I care about whether or not I when I had MMA, I gave my folks one piece of advice. I said there are only two things a client. This is very cynical, by the way. It may surprise you that I could be cynical. Uh, uh, I said there are only two things that a client cares about when you go in to talk to him or her. One is, does he get to go home Friday night and see his family? First. Second, does he meet his corporate objectives and get his great big bonus at the end of the year? I mean, altruism, love, Tang is better than it doesn't really signify. And as you go up the chain, you get to the CEO. The CEO is looking for his $50 million
Mhm.
exit packet or whatever it is. And he frankly doesn't care. I mean, you want to, you nerds want to. I mean, you ever watch the IT Crowd, the British show?
No.
It's very funny, and the head of Renhome Industries, will introduce the people in IT as, those people.
Mhm.
That is, we're becoming those people. It doesn't signify the things we're talking about matter only insofar as it makes money,
Right.
and not for Nielsen, or WPP. And I think the way this stuff has got to be, should be marketed. I mean, the way we marketed MMA back in the day is, what's your objective?
I do think that strategy and some of the ways you described the way it was used early on is absolutely the right way, regardless of how advanced the technology is,
Yeah,
which is what does it do for you? And the examples you gave with Maxwell House in Boston and that was that it identified things going on that the humans wouldn't have seen otherwise. And then they as humans could go in and figure out like, oh, what do we do about that? I think the same thing's true with AI. The quid pro quo to the regression of the to the mean is that what this technology is really good at is identifying patterns that humans could go in and make decisions about. And I don't think that'll ever go away. I hope that they don't turn over to AI agents completely. Um, but I think the way you set it up and the way you used it, that is the true solution for today, which is identifying problems that humans can think about and do better. Yeah, that
yeah.
was my soapbox.
No, I think
Okay.
I think that's correct.